Alright, hi! So listen, I have been down the deepest rabbit hole lately. Not the cute kind, not like, oh look, cottagecore bread recipes and mushroom errands. No. I mean the kind where you start reading old European folk tales and suddenly you're like, okay, were people in the past okay? Because this feels like a group of who desperately needed therapy. And maybe a priest, and maybe a nap. Because the more you dig into old fairy tales, the more you realize something very important. People, back then, were unhinged. Absolutely, unapologetically unhinged. And today, we are doing Little Red Riding Hood. But not the sparkly la la la, I'm skipping through the woods with perfect hair and zero concerns version. We are going into the older versions. The ones that make you pause mid-sentence and go, why would anyone read this to a child? But before we get into that, let me set the mood. Imagine you are walking somewhere quiet. It doesn't even have to be a forest. Honestly, a grocery store parking lot at 9 p.m. can deliver the exact same energy. Everything is normal. And then suddenly, it's like the world hits mute. No sound, no movement, just that thick, eerie silence. And your instinct whispers, something's off. That feeling, that exact vibe, is what the original versions of Little Red Riding Hood were meant to give. Not cozy bedtime energy. More like, maybe don't walk alone tonight. Alright, everybody breathe, get comfy, grab a drink, because this story, the deeper you go, the messier it gets. So let me ask you something. Did you grow up with the version where Little Red Riding Hood is this sweet, innocent girl carrying a basket full of goodies for her grandma? Because in a lot of retellings, they barely mention what's inside the basket, and it always drove me nuts. Like, I need to know. Bread, cheese, soup, a full medieval charcuterie board? Fact check moment. In the French version by Charles Perrault, 1697, she's specifically carrying a galette, it's a type of cake or pastry, and a small pot of butter. That's what she actually brings. So there you go, mystery solved. And your grandma just lives alone in the woods like it's the most normal thing ever. Sure, that seems safe. Anyway, the version most of us grew up with goes something like this. The wolf tricks her. The grandma gets into a situation. The wolf puts on grandma cosplay, and then suddenly a woodsman shows up from nowhere like he was waiting behind a tree rehearsing his heroic entrance. But that version, no. That's the Instagram filtered, kid-friendly, everybody gets a hug edition. Because the oldest printed version, the one written by Charles Perrault in 1697, went very differently. Perrault wasn't writing for children. He was writing morality tales for young women in French court. Basically, here's how not to get tricked in life. And his version, Little Red does not get saved. There is no woodsman, there is no second chance. The wolf wins. At the end, Perrault even adds a very obvious moral saying. Ladies, beware of charming strangers. He wasn't even pretending. He spelled it out like a warning label. Iconic? Honestly, yes. But also, yikes. Alright, one more sip. Because this, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. Alright, we need to talk about the hood, because people love to act like the red hood is just cute. As if some medieval stylist woke up one day and went, blue? Oh, green? Boring. Let's go with red because she needs to pop on the page. Absolutely not. Old European folktales did not do random color choices. If someone shows up in red, that color is screaming a message. And before anyone comes for me, no, these aren't modern TikTok theories. These interpretations come from actual folklorists, like the big names, Jig Sipes, Maria Tatar, Paul Delarue, people who have spent their entire academic lives swimming in these grim little stories, so we don't have to. So let's be clear. The red hood was never just a fashion choice. It symbolized transformation, crossing a boundary, awareness, danger, independence, stepping into adulthood, temptation, and the moment innocence starts to fade. Basically, the Red Hood is her main character moment. Like, this isn't the beginning of her childhood, this is the moment she steps into the world and the world says, "Alright babe, let's see what you are made of." But here's the twist most people do not expect. The Red Hood didn't exist in the oldest versions, not even a hint of it. In the oldest oral traditions, stories told before being written, the girl didn't wear red. She didn't have a cape. She wasn't even explicitly a child in some versions. She was just a young girl, a traveler, a female protagonist heading into the woods. So, where did the Red Hood come from? Charles Perrault edited in 1697. Yes, the oldest printed version invented the hood. And he did it completely deliberately. Perrault loved symbolism the way we love iced coffee. He didn't write cozy stories. He wrote morality lessons disguised as fairy tales. This hood was his way of saying, pay attention to this girl. She's growing up, she's curious, and the world is about to slap her with a hard reality check. And it goes even deeper. Folklorists believe Perrault also chose red because it visually contrasts the rest of the story. Dark woods, dark wolf, dark house, and then boom, a bright red hood. Red against black is one of the oldest visual storytelling tricks. It signals this character is walking into danger and either doesn't know it or pretends she doesn't. And honestly, a young girl wandering into the forest wearing the brightest color imaginable is not subtle. She might as well have put a neon sign above her head saying, "Please notice me." Now, before we move forward, we need to talk about the oldest version of this tale. Because compared to them, Perrault's wolf is basically a polite inconvenience. Let's talk about the story of the grandmother. It's one of the oldest recorded versions. This is where things get unhinged. The girl arrives at her grandmother's house, except things feel wrong. The voice sounds off, the vibe is weird. She's told to put meat on the table. She does it. And then later she realizes the meat was her grandmother. Yes, this is an actual detail. I remember reading that and feeling my soul leave my body. Like, I had to blink and reread because, excuse me? This isn't a bedtime story. This is generational trauma being passed down orally. And these old tales didn't end with tidy morals. No, and the lesson is, the story itself was the warning, because back then forests weren't aesthetic Pinterest backgrounds. They were terrifying, unpredictable, full of real threats. Animals, criminals, getting lost, freezing. Villagers genuinely feared the woods. So this story, it wasn't for entertainment. It was survival training disguised as storytelling. You know how parents today say, "Don't talk to strangers"? Back then, it was more like, "Don't wander into woods unless you want something wearing your grandma's voice to talk to you." No wonder kids behave. Alright, deep breath, sip your drink, because we are about to move into the truly wild part. Alright, buckle up, because the wolf? Yeah, he hasn't always been a wolf. And honestly, the alternatives are worse. In the modern, kid-friendly version, he's basically a dramatic theater villain. Big teeth, big attitude, big "I'm gonna eat your grandma" energy. But in older versions, the ones told long before Perrault wrote anything down, the wolf is flexible. Sometimes he's a wolf, sometimes he's a man, sometimes he's both, sometimes he's something supernatural that doesn't even have a name. Folklore girlies were not shy. Basically, ancient storytellers look at the idea of dangerous stranger and said, let's make him half animal, half man, maybe a shapeshifter. Let's really ruin someone's sleep. Pure folklore chaos. And the more you read, the more you realize something important. The creature's form is not the point. The disguise is the point. Because the real fear wasn't animals, it was deception. In the earliest oral stories, the danger wasn't the big bad wolf. The real fear was the idea that something harmful could pretend to be someone safe. That moment when your brain whispers, something isn't right, but what? That instinct is older than writing itself. Now let's get into the creepier fact-checked versions because, oh yeah, they exist. Italian folklore? Absolutely unhinged. Italian folklorist Italo Calvino collected an old northern Italy variant where the villain isn't a wolf at all. It's more of a foxman hybrid, a creepy, cunning, human-like creature. In other versions from the Alps, the creature is a shapeshifter who can mimic human voices so perfectly it's unsettling. So, when we hear the wolf imitating Grandma's voice, that isn't cute, that isn't funny, that is ancient horror storytelling. Now, picture this. You are living in a tiny medieval village with no electricity. Once the sun goes down, darkness isn't aesthetic, it's absolute. If something knocks on your door at night and imitates the voice of someone you know, girl, no, that's nightmare fuel. And that's exactly why these stories were told. Not to terrify children for fun, but to teach caution in a world where real danger existed. But here's the twist most people don't know. In some of the oldest versions, Little Red actually wins. Yeah, she wasn't always the helpless, sweet, slightly confused child we see today. In the story of the grandmother, one of the earliest recorded French versions, once she realizes something is off, she doesn't freeze. She thinks. She tells the creature she needs to go outside to use the bathroom. The creature lets her go. She ties the rope she's holding to a tree or a well bucket, depending on the version, and she runs. She saves herself. No woodsman, no dramatic rescue, just pure, clever survival. Honestly, justice for Little Red. She said, bathroom break? Actually, that's my escape route. But then something happened. Later versions, especially the ones written down for children, softened her character. They made her passive, quiet, rule-breaking in a see what happens when you don't listen way. And the villain became a big, scary, unambiguous wolf. Folklorists explain this shift perfectly. Old tales, be smart, trust your instincts, notice danger. Later tales, obey the rules, don't wander off, stay innocent. Two completely different messages. And it all comes down to who the stories were meant for. Because once we hit the Grimm brothers, oh girl, everything changes. Alright, sip your drink, because we are entering the era of the Grimms. And they sanitized, rearranged, moralized, and basically rebranded the story like a PR team on a deadline. Alright, now we get to the Grimm brothers, Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm. Two men who basically wander around German-speaking regions collecting stories from anyone who would talk to them, especially older women, folklore Pokemon cards, if you will. And the Grimms, they did not come to play. They wanted to preserve folktales, yes, but they also wanted to polish them, fix them, clean them up so they could be used for educating children, not traumatizing them into never leaving their house. So when they published their first edition of Rothkap Hen in 1812, they made some major changes. First huge change, they added the woodsman, that axe-wielding hero who bursts through the door like, "Not today, wolf." Yeah, he did not exist in the early versions. No brave man, no rescue, no dramatic wolf surgery. The Grimms invented him, a total early 1800s action movie reboot. And why did they do that? Because the Grimms were writing during a time when Europe was becoming more structured, more moralistic, more children should behave and follow the rules. So they shaped fairy tales into teaching tools. Not funny teaching tools, not gentle teaching tools, but listen or face consequences teaching tools. They wanted kids to learn, don't wander off, don't talk to strangers, stay on the path, obey your parents, resist temptation, and definitely don't go exploring the woods alone. Honestly, it's giving helicopter parenting, but make it 1812. The Grimms didn't want Little Red to be clever like she was in earlier oral tales. They wanted her to be rescued, to be soft, obedient, and to illustrate a moral. And kind of, see, this is what happens when you don't listen vibe. And here's something very interesting. The Grimms constantly edited their own stories. People think they wrote one version and that's it. Nope. They released multiple editions and each one got cleaner, softer, more child-friendly. They toned down the violence. They added religious lessons in some tales. They removed some of the more graphic or taboo elements. It was like, eating people is a lot. Maybe let's not. Should the wolf explode? Probably not. Well, maybe. Let's make sure the girl survives. That seems nice. And so, on their final versions, the plot goes like this. Wolf eats grandma. Wolf eats Little Red. Woodsman arrives. He cuts the wolf open. Grandma and Little Red comes out safe. Wolf is punished. Everyone learns a big moral about listening. But wait, this is the twist almost no one knows. The Grimms added a second story about Little Red, a sequel. A follow-up that is almost never included in children's books. In this continuation, Little Red is walking again. Same woods, same situation. Another wolf tries the same tricks. And she basically goes full girl boss. She refuses to talk to him. She stays far away. She recognizes the signs. She doesn't fall for anything. Together, she and Grandma trap the wolf in a trough filled with water. The wolf falls in because he's leaning over to look inside. He drowns, and that's the end. No rescue, no woodsman, she saves herself. They outsmart the danger. It's like the Grimms were saying, okay, she learned, chill. So even though they softened the original tale, they also gave her a redemption arc. But the bigger picture, the Grimm version isn't just a children's story. It's basically an early 1800s PSA, like those posters in schools that warn kids not to talk to strangers. Except instead of a reminder to hold hands on field trips, you get a wolf swallowing your grandmother whole. Different generations, same messaging. And honestly, while the Grimms made the story less brutal, they also made it symbolic. Less about real physical danger and more about choices, caution, instincts, boundaries, and that moment when innocence meets reality. It's softer, but not too soft. Still dark, just not what did I just read dark. Okay, so now that we have walked through centuries of shape-shifting wolves, questionable grandmothers, and the Grimms behaving like the moral police of early 19th century Europe, it's time to ask the real question. Why does this story stick? Why does Little Red Riding Hood cling to your brain like glitter after a craft project? Because there's a reason this tale has survived for centuries. There's a reason almost every culture has some version of. Girls enters danger. Something disguised waits for her. And no, it's not just because wolves were terrifying. Although, let's be honest, if I were 5 and I saw a real medieval wolf, I would simply assent. The deeper reason is psychological. And this is where the big folklorists and analysts come in. Maria Tatar, Jack Sipes, Bruno Bettelheim, they didn't study these stories as cute bedtime moments. They studied them as reflections of human fear. So let's break down exactly what this story pokes inside our brains. Fear number 1. I thought I was safe. This is the big one. one of the most universal human fears. The idea that something familiar, a home, a relative, a place you trust, can suddenly become unsafe. The wolf pretending to be grandma isn't just creepy, it's symbolic. It taps into the fear that danger isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes it looks normal, sometimes it speaks gently, sometimes it knows things it shouldn't. And honestly, tell me this isn't still relevant today. People pretend to be anything online. Friendly, trustworthy, safe. If medieval villagers had Wi-Fi, this would have been a cyber safety presentation. Fear number 2 is leaving childhood behind. Here's what psychologists get excited. A little red wanders off the path. In folklore, the path represents safety, childhood, predictability, rules, and the forest represents chaos, the unknown, risk, growing up, temptation, or independence. So stepping off the path is a metaphor. She's not a child anymore. But she's not an adult either. She's in that messy, awkward, confusing in-between stage where the world suddenly stops making sense the way it used to. In other words, Little Red is every one of us at 13, convinced we know everything, while we know absolutely nothing. Fear number 3 is being too trusting. In every version, even the ones where she escapes, Little Red overshares. She tells the wolf where she's going, who she's visiting, what her plans are, her entire itinerary. She basically shares her location before that existed. Folklorists point out that her mistake isn't curiosity, it's overtrust. It's the moment where your stomach whispers, something feels weird, and your brain replies, no, be polite, don't assume the worst. Psychologists say this tale is a reminder that you are allowed to withhold information. You are allowed to listen to your instincts. You are allowed to question someone who feels off. It's not rudeness, it's survival. Fear number 4. The forest is your brain on anxiety. This one is fascinating. Modern analysts argue that the forest in the story functions like a metaphor for the mind, especially the anxious mind. A place where things twist unexpectedly. Shadows distort familiar shapes, danger feels close even when you are alone, logic gets weird, instincts get louder. Some researchers even compare Little Red's journey to walking through your subconscious, exploring your fears, facing the unknown, learning to navigate the darkness. It's giving therapy, but make it medieval horror, which honestly, mood. Alright, let's talk about something that blew my mind the first time I went digging into this story. Little Red Riding Hood, not just European. I mean, yes, the version most people know comes from France and Germany, but the pattern, a girl meets a disguised predator, danger masquerading as family, shows up all over the world. Folklorists actually had to sit down like, is this universal trauma? Did everyone simultaneously decide, let's terrify our children? But no, it doesn't look like a copy-paste. It looks like multiple cultures naturally invented incredibly similar stories because certain fears are universal. And trust me, some of these versions are absolutely unhinged in the best way. Okay, Italy, home of pasta, passion, and one of the oldest versions of this tale. This story is called La Finta Nonna, the fake grandmother, collected by folklorists like Italo Calvino. And this version, pure chaos. Because the wolf isn't always a wolf. Sometimes he's a man, a fox, a shapeshifter, or a weird human-animal hybrid. In many Italian versions, grandma is replaced. The creature tries to trick the girl, and the girl escapes using her brain, not a savior. One classic scene is when the girl says she needs to go outside, ties a rope to something and then runs, just sprinting into survival mode like, okay, bye sweetie, have fun impersonating my grandmother. Iconic. Also, this version is considered much older than Perrault's. Now let's move to the Alps. These versions come from France, Switzerland and Austria. The predator here has one terrifying trait. It perfectly imitates human voices. People in mountain villages genuinely believe something could knock on the door at night and sound like someone you know. Imagine living in a tiny wooden house in a valley, the moon barely lighting anything, and someone outside whispers in your grandma's voice. Nope, I would evaporate. These versions aren't really about wandering off the path. They are about the fear that danger can sneak in. If you thought Europe was wild, get ready. China has a story called the Tiger Grandmother, and it is very real and well documented. Instead of a wolf, there's a tiger wearing human clothing pretending to be a grandmother. This version usually features siblings instead of one girl. The tiger knocks on the door, pretends to be grandma, gets invited in, and eventually tries to eat them. But, and this is an important distinction, in many Chinese versions, the kids escape on their own. They trick the tiger, climb a tree, or get the tiger to fall into a trap. Korea has its own versions of the fake relative story. The most famous parallels come from traditional Korean tales where a creature pretends to be a parent or family member to trick children. These stories typically involve two siblings, a creature pretending to be a parent or grandparent, the children noticing something feels wrong, and escaping by climbing a tree or outsmarting the creature. And here's the biggest difference. In Korean versions, the children are clever, not naive. They question things. They test the grandparent. They escape by being smart, not by being saved. It's a totally different tone from the European models, where Little Red is often portrayed as innocent and overly trusting. So why does this story appear everywhere? Folklorists have two leading theories. The first one is universal fear of deception. Across almost every human culture, one fear repeats: something dangerous pretending to be safe. This is older than wolves, older than tigers, older than Europe. Humans have always feared predators that hide behind masks, literal or symbolic. The second one is danger outside the home. Forests, mountains, jungles, unknown paths. Every society had something out there that could harm a wandering child. So parents created stories that basically said, don't leave the house, don't wander alone, don't trust strangers. Modern version, don't get into a stranger's car. Medieval version, don't get eaten by a wolf pretending to be your grandmother. Same energy. Alright, so we have talked about wolves, who sometimes weren't even wolves, grandmas who, listen, I'm still not emotionally recovered from that one, and cultures all over the world telling basically the exact same nightmare in different forms. But now we need to talk about what folklorists call the big three symbols of Little Red Riding Hood. The woods, the hunger, the transformation. Those three show up everywhere. Italy, France, Germany, China, the Alps, Korea, it doesn't matter. Every version has these pieces baked in because they are not just details. They are the actual heartbeat of the story. So let's break them down. Sip your drink, deep breath, we are going in. Real talk, in folktales the woods are never about trees. They are a metaphor wearing bark. In European folklore, and this is historically accurate, forests were terrifying. People genuinely got lost. They were wolves, yes, but also thieves, starving animals, and general medieval chaos. So forests became symbol for Danger, temptation, the unknown, leaving the safety of home, independence, fear, your subconscious, and choices with consequences. Folklorists like Maria Tatar and Czech Zipes describe the woods as the place where the entire childhood innocence bubble pops. It's not just a location, it's a psychological transition zone. In modern terms, the woods are puberty, they are anxiety, they are the moment life stops being a playground and becomes confusing. So when little red steps off the path, symbolically it's the moment she steps out of childhood and into the messy, unpredictable real world. The woods are not scenery. The woods are a mood. Okay, hunger. This is where every folklorist goes, yes, this part. In folktales, hunger is never just about food. It symbolizes danger, obsession, being overwhelmed, losing control, being consumed by something bigger, a threat that takes and never gives back. In old storytelling, being eaten was basically the ultimate fear because it represented the loss of your body, your safety, your identity, everything. And here's something interesting. Even in cultures where the creature isn't a wolf, the hunger remains. Tigers, fox spirits, shapeshifters, they all want to devour. That's why folklorists consider devouring hunger the universal danger symbol. The Grimm version, where the woodsman cuts open the wolf and pulls out the grandmother alive, that's not random gore. It's symbolic. Restoring what was taken, reversing destruction, reclaiming life. It's medieval therapy. A little messy, a little violent, but emotionally very clear. Everyone gets obsessed with the creature transforming. Wolf to grandma, tiger to grandmother figure, shapeshifter to human voice imitation. But the real transformation is little rats. She goes from trusting to cautious, childish to aware, passive to active, innocent to informed. In some versions, she escapes. In some, she outsmarts the creature. In the earliest ones, she sometimes doesn't survive, which wasn't meant to punish her, but to warn the listeners. Either way, the symbolic journey stays the same. A young girl steps into the woods, meets something dangerous, and comes out changed. Or the listeners learn from her instead. Folklorists say this is why the story has lasted for more than 1,000 years. Because every version captures the same universal moment. Oh, the world is not as safe as I thought. That's the transformation, not the wolf changing, but the girl's mind changing. It's not a story about a wolf, it's a story about crossing a threshold from innocence to awareness. Okay, so here's the thing that absolutely blows my mind every single time. Little Red Riding Hood is old, like ancient, older than most modern nations old. Yet somehow this girl in a bright red cloak is still out there. Centuries later, getting movie deals, inspiring horror games, psychology papers, fan art, Broadway musicals, TikTok edits, everything. Every generation rediscovers her and goes, yeah, I relate to this, let's bring her back. Which begs the question, why this story? Why did this one survive when thousands of other medieval stories are basically rotting in some folklore graveyard? Let's talk about it. And once we go through this together, you won't unsee it. Writers today are obsessed with the structure of Little Red Riding Hood, even when they pretend they are not referencing it. It always goes like this. A girl walking alone, a place that feels off, something dangerous watching her before she realizes it, a predator pretending to be safe. You can put that plot in a forest, a city, space, the internet, it still works. Hollywood sees that and goes, oh yeah, delicious, give me more. That's why we have Red Riding Hood from 2011 with the moody supernatural wolf, The Company of Wolves with full psychoanalytic dream symbolism, Into the Woods, where she suddenly gets a Broadway solo, Once Upon a Time, where she basically becomes a whole mythological force on her own. The reason it works is simple. Flash a red cloak for 2 seconds and the audience instantly knows the entire emotional setup. It's that deeply wired into our collective brain. Even in video games, anything with a creature mimicking a human voice, a threat hiding behind a friendly mask, a character walking into unsafe territory alone is basically running on Red Riding Hood DNA. People think they are playing something new, but honestly, it's the same fear medieval villagers whispered about while trying not to freak themselves out in the dark. Here's the part every folklorist agrees on. The heart of Little Red Riding Hood is not the wolf, it's the disguise. The wolf pretending to be someone safe, the grandmother's voice being imitated, the danger that doesn't look dangerous until it's too late. And the theme is timeless. People feared it in the 1400s, people fear it now, and honestly, maybe even more today. Because let's be real, nobody is wandering into the deep dark woods anymore. Our versions of the woods is social media, DMs, dating apps, Discord servers, comment sections, anywhere people can pretend to be something they aren't. That's the modern forest. Dark, exciting, unpredictable, full of red flags if you know what to look for. And the Red Hood? That's your online identity, your profile picture, your username, your digital footprint. It makes you visible, it makes you recognizable, and sometimes it makes you a target. And the wolf? Sweetie, the wolf is anyone hiding behind a screen. That's why the story won't die. It keeps reshaping itself into whatever threat feels the most relevant in each century. In medieval Europe, wolves. In East Asia, tigers. In stories from the Alps, shapeshifters. In our world today, people pretending to be someone they are not. Little Red Riding Hood is basically the universal human fear of being misled, wrapped in a cute red cloak. We connect to her because we have all wandered off the safe path. We have all trusted someone we shouldn't have. We have all ignored our instincts at least once. We have all that, oh wait, something's wrong moment. Every generation retells this story because every generation has its own version of the wolf. And honestly, that's why this story refuses to die. It keeps evolving, just like the world does. So here's where the things get personal. Because after centuries of wolves, tigers, shapeshifters, tricksters, and dark forests, something starts to become really obvious. Little Red Riding Hood isn't just a folktale, it's a mirror. And if you sit with this story long enough, it stops feeling like something told to kids and starts feeling like a metaphor for, well, being human. And not into curated Pinterest perfect version of human. I mean the messy, confused, beautifully chaotic version we are all. Let me explain. People always focus on the red hood like it's just a cute accessory. But folklorists have been saying for years that the hood symbolizes something deeper, something you carry with you everywhere. It's the part of you that stands out. The part that says, here I am, this is me. Your visibility, your identity, your spark. And as you get older, you realize you never stop wearing some kind of red hood. It just changes form. For some people, it's confidence. For others, it's vulnerability they didn't choose. Sometimes it's the trait people notice first. Sometimes it's the thing you wish they wouldn't. But either way, it's yours. And it makes you visible in the world. And the woods? Yeah, we all go through those eventually. Maybe it's your first heartbreak. maybe it's leaving home, maybe it's losing someone you love, maybe it's realizing the world is a little darker, a little louder, a little sharper than you thought. There's always that moment where life stops feeling like a cozy cottage and suddenly looks a lot more like the part of the forest where the trees lean in too close. And the wolf, whatever form it takes, always shows up earlier than we want. Sometimes the wolf is a person, sometimes it's a bad choice, sometimes it's fear, anxiety, burnout, sometimes it's self-doubt wearing your grandma's nightgown, pretending it belongs there. Psychologists call this a threshold moment, the point in the story where everything shifts, where you shifts. And that's why this tale lasted 1,000 years. Because it's not really about being eaten or rescued or punished or saved. It's about stepping onto your own path and learning how to walk through the forest with your hood on, fully aware that the world isn't as simple as it looked from your childhood window. Here's the part I love most about all the versions. In some stories, Little Red Riding Hood escapes on her own. In some, she's rescued. In others, she learns, grows, and outsmarts the next wolf she meets. The endings are different everywhere, but every version agrees on one thing. She never walks out of the forest the same person she was when she walked in. And honestly, isn't that all of us? We enter life with a bright red cloak, new, hopeful, shiny, and at some point we take a wrong turn. We trust the wrong person, we ignore our instincts, we get hurt. The world bites back. But the point isn't that she made a mistake. The point is that she learns. She becomes someone who can see through disguises, someone who knows the difference between comfort and danger, between kindness and manipulation, between illusion and reality. That's the moment she stops being a child. That's the moment she becomes someone who can walk through the forest, eyes open, hood on, fully aware. The strange thing about Little Red Riding Hood is that the older you get, the more you realize the wolf was never just a wolf. He was a pattern, a feeling, a moment in your life where something dangerous smiled at you like it meant well. And it's wild because the wolf never shows up looking like danger. He shows up looking friendly, comforting, almost right, almost safe, and that almost is where everything falls apart. At some point in your life, you look back and think, oh, that was it. That was the wolf. I just didn't see the teeth yet. Maybe it was a friendship they started warm and slowly drained the joy out of you. Maybe it was a relationship wrapped in compliments that turned into confusion. Maybe it was a job you thought would light you up but ended up quietly burning you down from the inside. And sure, sometimes the wolf is a person. But just as often, the wolf is a situation, a choice, a moment where you ignored your instincts because you wanted so badly to believe the best. And here's the part nobody wants to admit, but everybody understands. Sometimes we are the ones wearing the wolf skin. Not intentionally, but in the way we pretend we are okay when we are breaking. In the way we push past our limits. In the way we hide our real feelings behind, I'm fine, don't worry. We use disguises too. Because the world teaches you early on that not everyone deserves access to your softness. And that's why this story is so sticky. It mirrors us more than we want to admit. It's this constant tug of war between the part of us that wants to trust and the part that wants to protect itself. The Red Hood and the wolf living inside the same person. I always think about that moment in the cottage. Little Red standing in the doorway, staring at a face that looks almost like Grandma. The lighting is wrong, the voice is off, the energy is strange, and even though nothing looks obviously dangerous, something inside her whispers, something's not right. Psychologists say your instincts see the truth long before your mind figures it out. And that's exactly what this story has always been about. The part of you that knows even when you can't explain why. And maybe that's why the endings change across cultures. Some rats outsmart the danger, some run, some get rescued, some don't. Because everyone's wolf looks different. Everyone's forest has its own shadows. Everyone learns at a different pace how to read the room or read the teeth hiding behind a smile. But one thing stays the same in every version. You don't walk out of the woods as the same person who walked in. And honestly, that's life. Nobody gets through the forest untouched. You just learn to see more clearly in the dark. You know what nobody really talks about? Not the wolf, not the deception, not even the moment everything falls apart. It's what happens after. That strange, quiet moment when you finally step out of the forest and realize you are not the same person who walked in. Your hands are shaking a little, your heart is still beating too fast, and suddenly the world that used to feel familiar just looks a tiny bit off, like someone adjusted the brightness without warning. Every version of Little Red Riding Hood skips over that part. They give you the danger, the panic, the big dramatic moment, but they never linger on the silence that comes after the chaos, when you are just standing there thinking, okay, so what do I do now? And honestly, that's one of the realest parts of the entire story. Because anyone who's ever been hurt or misled or blindsided by life knows that the moment after is the strangest one. You are out of the woods, technically, but mentally, your brain is still back between the trees trying to understand what just happened. And in every version of the tale, Little Red leaves the forest changed. Sometimes she is shaken, sometimes she's wiser, sometimes she's angry, sometimes she's quiet, but she never walks out unchanged. Because the forest doesn't let you leave as the same person who entered. And that's kind of how life works, right? Nobody signs up for the forest moment. You don't wake up and think, yes, today I would love to have my worldview shattered, thank you. Life just hands you the chapter without asking. A betrayal, a disappointment, a moment where someone you trusted shows a side you didn't want to believe existed. Or maybe it's a situation that forced you to grow faster than you were ready for. Suddenly you are surrounded by shadows you didn't notice before, and your instincts, those little whispers you sometimes ignore, are suddenly the only map you have. But here's the thing these old tales quietly try to tell you. You aren't meant to stay there. The forest isn't supposed to be permanent. It's where you are tested, not where you live. And when you finally step out, even if you are bruised or a little unsure, that moment is the return to yourself. Not the old version, not the naive one, but the version who actually sees the world for what it is and still decides to move forward. Because the truth is, the woods don't break you, they refine you, they sharpen your instincts, they teach you how to listen to the voice inside you that says, something's wrong, even when everything looks fine on the surface. And maybe that's why this story lasted for centuries. Not because of the wolf, or the danger, or the shocking twist, but because everyone at some point walks out of a figurative forest and thinks, wow, I made it. I didn't think I would, but I did. A little red becomes all of us. Anyone who ever trusted the wrong person, missed the red flags, ignored their intuition, and still found their way back to themselves. Shaken? Yeah, but not broken. Wiser, but still soft enough to care. Still brave enough to keep walking. And that quiet strength is the real ending nobody talks about. So here we are, back at the edge of the forest. If you've ever been out in the woods around dusk, you know that strangely quiet feeling. The way the air gets cooler, the shadows stretch out like they are trying to touch your shoes, and everything suddenly feels paused, like the whole world is taking a breath. And honestly, that's exactly where Little Red Riding Hood leaves us. Not inside the darkest parts of the woods, not face to face with the wolf, not even in that eerie cottage where everything feels almost right, except it wasn't. Instead, the story leaves us right here, in that strange, quiet space after everything has happened, when the danger is behind you, but the lesson is still settling in your bones. In that moment feels so human, because life doesn't stop to give you a neat moral at the end of a scary chapter. You don't get a narrator, you don't get theme music warning you something's wrong. You just get its stillness after something shifts inside you. And then you take a step, and another, and another. That's it. That's the whole rhythm. And maybe that's exactly why this story refused to die. Not because the wolf, not because of the cloak, not because our ancestor had nothing better to do than tell terrifying bedtime stories. It survived because of that one quiet truth. You keep going even when the world isn't as simple anymore. People always ask why these old stories matter, why we still tell them, why we still recognize ourselves in them. And the answer is actually simple. They are not about the past, they are about us, right now. They are trying to walk through a world full of bright paths and dark corners, trying to trust our instincts without losing our curiosity, trying to stay open without ignoring the warning signs glowing neon right in front of us. Every one of us wears some version of a red hood, the thing that makes us visible. Every one of us steps into the woods we didn't plan on entering. Every one of us meets a wolf who showed up wearing a disguise so good we almost fall for it. And sooner or later, we all find ourselves standing in a doorway just like Little Red, staring at something that feels familiar but not quite right. That almost safe feeling, almost trust, that almost comfort. And the story reminds us we are allowed to pause, we are allowed to question, we are allowed to walk away. Instincts aren't paranoia, they are wisdom wearing sneakers. And when Little Red finally steps back into the sunlight, cloak torn, basket empty, heart bruised, she's carrying something she didn't have before. Strength, awareness, clarity. A tiny spark of fire she didn't know she had. And if you have ever walked out of your own dark chapter, you know that feeling too. So, wherever you are, whatever forest you are trying to navigate, whatever shadow you are keeping an eye on, whatever little voice is whispering inside you, just remember this. You are not meant to stay lost. You are meant to make it out. You are meant to grow. You are meant to see the world with clearer eyes. And you are meant to keep walking, even if the path looks completely new, because that's the real ending of Little Red Riding Hood. Not fear, not danger, not a wolf, but the girl who went into the dark and came out wiser, stronger, and still herself. Alright, if you want another deep dive into a story that looks sweet on the outside, but is secretly a psychological horror show, let me know. I already have a few ready that might surprise you. Until then, stay safe, trust your instincts, and I will meet you on the next path.